On this episode of Through the Pines, we will cover transitioning into retirement, otherwise known as the freedom paradox. Welcome to a financial planning podcast with down-to-earth vibes. Sasquatch listens while changing the oil in his vintage Land Rover Defender. This is Through the Pines. We welcome back our advisors for this episode, Rex Baxter and Brandyn Smith. They are the 2023, 2024, and 2025 Forbes Best in-State Wealth Management Teams for Utah, well as the Advisor Hub's fastest growing advisors to watch under $1 billion, and the receivers of the Ameriprise Client Experience Award. Rex, are there any awards left that you haven't won that you're shooting for?
We don't really shoot for awards. Okay. So I appreciate that thought, but it takes a team, and we have a great team, so we're always pleased and happy when those come along.
Love that. Also, we have some guests in studio from the Hartford, John and Matt. John Diehl, thanks so much for being here and providing some insight to this topic, transitioning into retirement, the freedom paradox. John, what is this paradox that we are talking about here?
Yeah, so great question. So just a little bit on my background. I've been with Hartford Funds now about 38 years, but the last 25 years studying aging and longevity in partnership with a laboratory at MIT in Cambridge, Massachusetts, called the AgeLab. So we've been studying all aspects of aging and longevity, and then one of my roles with Hartford Funds is to travel the country and tell financial professionals, but also their clients, about what we're learning from MIT. This freedom paradox is right at the top of the heap in terms of kind of thinking about the narrative that most of us have heard about retirement. So I would ask you all, and maybe when I finish my comment, I'd love to hear, when you were younger, or maybe even right now, what were your thoughts about what retirement would be? Mm-hmm. Because for many people, we're taught like retirement is the pinnacle, right? We're working all our lives to get to this moment. The freedom paradox, we call it that because it really is a paradox. We've been told forever, if we work really hard, we do a good job saving, at some point, we're going to be able to retire. And at that point, freedom is ours, right? We can spend our time the way we want. We can spend our time with the people that we want, doing the things we want. But what we actually see is that after people retire, there's a giant issue going on in the country right now, and the issue is the issue of boredom, loneliness, isolation, because when we retire, oftentimes we retire a social network that we spent the last decade or two or three with. We also leave behind maybe a very big source of meaning and purpose in our lives, how we generate both respect for ourselves and how we generate respect in our community. People look at us for kind of what we did and how we did it. But all that kind of goes away. So the freedom paradox is, wait, I thought this was going to be something great. And I hate to admit this, but I'm kind of bored and I feel lost, right? There's a mix of anxiety and excitement when people approach this transition. So I'd just ask you guys, how have you thought about retirement as you came through your working years?
Boy, it really depends on the age I revert back to as to how I view retirement, because there were certain ages where I thought, and my viewpoint was, oh yeah, they're spent. They don't have anything left to give. They're done working and they need to be done. There's a stage in my life where I probably had those thoughts. There's a stage in my life where it was like, oh, wow, retirement means travel, and it means fun, and it means golf, and it means all these, you've got all this money, you can just go do anything you want at this point. And then as I've matured and grown and seen a lot of examples, retirement to me now means that I have the freedom to choose what I'm going to do next. Whether I want to continue working in the role I'm working in, whether I want to go and start a second phase, a second adventure, or whether I want to spend more time and flexibility with trips and family and memory making and things along that line. But to me now, it means the choice of those options.
Yeah, for me, I remember when I was young. So my grandpa died when I was, I think, 11 or 12 years old. And he was fairly young. He had just retired, and he passed away really quickly of a cancer. And I remember being in his office with my parents, and they were kind of, going through stuff. And he had these rolls that looked like thick rolls of $100 bills, like multiple, just lined up on the shelf. I was like, "Is that money?" And it was like a candle or
Grandpa
something.
was a blinger.
No. It was like a candle that you would light and it would burn out, which is funny in and of itself, right? Like you're burning money.
Burning money.
But I remember like my mom said something like, "Oh no, if those were real money, Grandpa would be a millionaire." And I was like, "What's a millionaire?" And it was just because I was younger, right? And my mom, well, basically, if you're a millionaire, you can buy whatever you want and you can do whatever you want. And I remember just thinking, okay, that seems like that's what I want, that seems like a good, okay, that's like the pinnacle, but similar to Rex as I've, I guess that was kind of the idea, right? Is all right, how do you get a lot of money so that you can just retire and live on a beach and do nothing, right? And then I guess as I've watched people, really intelligent, wise people, I've realized that retirement isn't about just getting to a state where you can do nothing, but rather having more freedom to be able to really accomplish what you want most in life. And I think for me, that is the pinnacle now, is having that freedom. And in a lot of ways that's retirement, but that doesn't mean not working. That doesn't mean, it just means more freedom.
Yeah, it's interesting, this relationship with MIT and their AgeLab, and to Rex's point of just depending on how far you go back of how you view this retirement. It's interesting today, right now, that MIT, they've rolled out some interesting data and information just in regards to, we've talked a little bit about time, and time's really the one thing we all want more of. We're not going to get. We have the 24 hours in a day, or however you break down the time. But they've recently shared with us, and you think about retirement and life expectancy. If we just, again, turn the clock back, 1900 in our country, life expectancy was 47 years old.
Whoa.
Just 125 years ago. Here we are today.
I'm doing great.
Wait, I'm rocking this. And then you fast forward to today, and life expectancy is 78. And so it's like we've been given this 30 plus year like longevity dividend to do this time back. Some other just interesting insights. So if you look at our country and you go back to 1950, in the year 1950, they shared with us that there were 2,300 centenarians, 100-plus-year-olds in our country. Mm-hmm. Today, there are 101,500 centenarians. So in a 75-year time period, we've gone from 2,000 to 101,000, and they're projecting by 2050 we're going to be at over 400,000 centenarians.
Shoot, I have to extend out my financial
plan.
Right. We need a little more growth in our portfolio. That's what this is feeling like.
110, Rex.
So again, when I think about retirement, it's not this time period, and we talk often about where did this whole retirement concept come from, and really 1960, Diehl Webb, kind of the real estate, the home builder, created it. 1960, Arizona, we're going to build these homes this close together, and we're going to have a pool and some golf courses, and people from Salt Lake and New York City, and they're going to move here because life expectancy was, I retire and I've got 6 to 7 years, and this is a great setup. Well, again, we're going to live a lot longer than we ever have before, and I know John could elaborate more on just this time of we're going to have a lot more of, and to plan for that. That's just some recent information.
It was interesting thinking about your story, Matt, of Diehl Webb. When he built Sun City, Arizona, critics said he was crazy. People were not going to sell their homes in Salt Lake City and Seattle and New York and Chicago, move to the middle of the desert where they could live right next to their neighbor, but they could play golf and swim all day long. The first day it opened, January 1st, 1960, they had a line of cars like 4 miles long waiting to get in, and the retirement of rest and relaxation was born. Many of us are still anchored in that model, right? Because we've observed kind of what our parents and grandparents thought about retirement. But Matt's right. If now we're going to be spending 15, 20, 25, 30 years in retirement, hey, don't get me wrong. I'm a big fan of rest and relaxation, but it's not going to fill 25 years worth of time. And so now we're talking about things like mission and purpose, right? And that boredom issue that I mentioned is it's extremely relevant.
It's kind of leads into my other podcast, the Ascent Life podcast, where we talk about purpose and the importance of it. I just remember, so when I saw my grandparents, one grandpa had a hobby, wood carving, but there was a lot of sitting around also. And then the other grandpa, fishing, gambling, duck hunting, and a lot of sitting around. I don't ever remember looking at either one of their lifestyles and thinking, oh, that's the dream, you know?
You know, the number one thing that changes in terms of, so there's a something called the time use survey. It's a government survey that talks about how do people spend minutes during the day in an average week. So if we look at pre-retirees versus retirees, what do you think the biggest changes? What activity we do so much more of after retiring than prior to retirement? Would you guess the answer is watching TV? How many of us say, I can't wait till I retire because I'm going to lock myself in my bedroom, turn on my favorite cable TV news channel, freak myself out about the world around me, and never go anywhere. Nobody says that. Nobody says, I cannot wait to watch more TV. The problem is, though, a vacuum exists. And if we don't intentionally fill it, it will be filled with something. But that something may not be what's best for us.
Okay, so we have to backfill it. And how do we do that? And should we work on that before retirement comes?
Yeah. So let me just kind of tell you about a study that MIT did with us several years ago. We call it a word survey. So they went out and they asked 1,000 people for 5 one-word answers that would describe what life after career would look like. So imagine we collected 5,000 individual examples. Now, people can choose any words they want out of the English language, which is probably, I don't know, in the 20,000s in terms of the number of words we have. You know, of all the responses that came back, 10 words made up over a third of all the responses. Words like happy, relaxed, fun, family. Freedom was the number one word. But what we've determined, and we've worked actually with a counseling psychologist. She's retired from University of Maryland. Her name's Nancy Schlossberg. Fascinating lady. Nancy herself is 96 years old, and she specializes in helping people understand life transitions, of which retirement is one of. Nancy and one of her colleagues, Morris Rosenberg, have really dug into what they think is the missing word. And the missing word in retirement is mattering. Right? So we've got all these other words, but what is it about mattering? And what do we mean by mattering? Because we've been taught that retirement is about what matters to me. What do I want to do? Kind of what hobbies do I want to? It's all me, me, me. I get that. But an extremely important aspect of it is, how do I matter to others? Right? So when we talk about mattering, we talk about things like, do I feel appreciated by others? Do I feel like who I am or what I do matters to others? Does anybody depend on me for anything? And as we begin to lose this sense of mattering, because nobody talks to us about how are you going to matter? Because, in fact, I'll just share this with you guys. When, especially for men, women are not excluded from this, but it's the second question that a man is most likely to get from someone they've never met before after they're asked their name is,
what do you do?
What do you do? And if we're retired, what do we say?
What did you do?
What did you do?
And I say, I'm a retired professor, I'm a retired engineer, I'm a retired farmer, I'm a retired. We carry this moniker with us of what we used to be, but we never spend the time to identify who we are now. Well, to not know who we are now and what we want to be about for the next 25 years is kind of a lonely place to be. So this concept of mattering, it's actually kind of interesting. The study started by Nancy Schlossberg, but really her colleague Morris Rosenberg, studying delinquent youths. And what they found was when young men felt that they didn't matter to anyone, rates of truancy and delinquency would go through the roof. And they concluded some of that study by saying, we think that the same may be true of retirees. Not that you're going to be delinquent and wind up in jail. However, this the significance of mattering is really important. Look, think about it. All your life, I'm guessing, and I hope, you felt like you mattered to others. You mattered to your parents. You mattered to your teachers. You mattered to your coworkers and your workplace. Now, all of a sudden, I retire. And we were joking early. Well, I'll matter to my spouse. I had one woman come up to me after one of our events and share. She said, "You know what the definition of retirement is? It's twice the husband, half the income." Yeah. Right? My friend at MIT says a woman came up to him and said, "I told my husband, I married you for life, not for lunch." Right? So don't just look at me and say, "What are we doing today?" But this whole idea of identity and mattering to others, extremely important. I don't know. Do you guys see it?
It's so true. And so when you share that, I have one particular client that at the moment just really comes to mind. And so, they ran a very successful business for 30, 35 years. It was their business. They ran it, and it was very, very successful. He retired early because the stress was getting to him at that point. And I asked him a couple of those questions. What are your plans? What are you going to do? How are you going to consume your time and things like that? And his thought was, well, I may consult a little bit. I may, pick up try another adventure or something like that. But what he found was that it was a lot more difficult to do those things because now people viewed him as a certain age. And because of that, he had a more difficult time, in the consulting. The companies he would consult for weren't quite as interested in that experience. They wanted somebody, that was a little more current or at least viewed as a little more current. And so then he tried, a secondary job, and they wouldn't listen to his advice and guidance on how they could improve that company and how they could improve that job and how they could improve the client experience and things like that. So that turned into a really frustrating. So it's just frustration after frustration for him that has turned into, what is my purpose in life? What am I trying to accomplish? And how can I do this when I don't seem to matter to anybody else at this point? And so it's a really frustrating thing to try and hold his hand through. And as a byproduct of that, sometimes money is the crutch that starts getting spent thinking that that's going to fix things, and it doesn't fix things. And so it is an interesting thing. It's also interesting as advisors that these are a lot of the conversations we're having to have. It's not, should I buy ABC stock or XYZ stock? It's, oh my gosh, I retired, now what?
Yeah.
You know what fixed things, Rex? Porsche 911 Speedster.
Yeah. Land Rover Defender.
Yeah.
Talk to Sasquatch.
Brandon?
Yeah, I think everybody's different, but I cannot believe how often clients, when I talk to them maybe 1, 2, 3 months after retirement, almost uniformly they say, "I don't know how I had time to work. Like my life just filled up." And is it filling with good things or bad things? I think both, right? But I think being aware that there is sometimes that vacuum, that being intentional about what you want out of retirement is incredibly important because it will fill up with, whether it's community things, whether it's family thing, like, oh, hey, dad has some extra time now, maybe he can, and so I think trying to very, very intentionally live your life, of your retirement life, is important.
Yeah, I think that word intentional, MIT, the AgeLab, they talk about that quite a bit. And just as you go through life, they talk about a term called chance collisions. And then they also talk about intentional interactions. And what's interesting, kind of the graphs and the plots that they've demonstrated, is we'll go through life and you think about kind of high school, college, is you're in an environment for 6 to 8 hours a day with 30 other folks in your classroom, and if it's whatever the school is, you rotate. So you're just surrounded by 20 to 30 in that class, and you switch to another class. So hundreds of these chance collisions to have these social engagements or interactions, or to learn from other individuals. And then that kind of peaks in the 20s, and then we typically marry, and then those chance collisions get less and less, and then especially once we retire, that social network literally just continues to shrink and shrink and shrink. And so the advice or recommendations is literally to plan and map out, have intentional interactions to, again, you're going to have the family interactions. I don't know, John, maybe talk about the third place concept or idea. Share that with the group.
Sure. Yeah, we can talk about. So let me back up a second, Matt, just to talk about how we want people to kind of think about these transitions. First of all, a question I would pose to listeners is, are you as prepared psychologically for retirement as you are financially? Right? One downside of our financial industry is we seem to have reduced retirement into a calculation, like what's your number? But oftentimes we find people can have ample resources in retirement, but if they're bereft from a psychological standpoint, they feel lost. And then, as you said, Rex, like all of a sudden the money starts kind of trying to fill that void, but it's not the answer. So Nancy Schlossberg talks about what she calls a psychological portfolio. And a psychological portfolio is really built of three components. It's your identity, it's your relationships, and it's your purpose or your mission.
Oh, love that.
And so if we start with identity, let me just share a story with you because it happened. I travel all over the country on a constant basis, but this one happened in the Salt Lake City area with me a couple of years ago. I got into my Uber, and I always interview my Uber drivers, because we know that about 30% of Uber drivers, that was the last number I saw, are over age 50. They get the highest ratings on the system. And when you ask them why they drive in that category, money's number 3. Number 1 is I love the flexibility. I can turn it on and off. Number 2 is if I weren't doing this, I'd probably be sitting around doing nothing, right? So I meet nice people, have conversations. So this gentleman that was my Uber driver, he was older. I would have said he was in his 70s. I think he told me that. He was a retired professor from Weber State University. He was involved with the MBA program for engineering at the university, and he was telling me about all that they did. And then he was telling me he encountered some health issues, and then the virus set in, and he retired. And he had to rethink who he was. And he just loves driving people for Uber because he meets them. Yeah. When I got out of his car, he handed me a business card, right, with his name on it, contact information on the back. He had his mission statement, which was something to the effect of bringing joy to people through whatever manner he can. For him, it was driving. And we talked about that. And so when we think about identity, right, the question is, if you were to produce a business card that said who you were or what you're doing now, not what you did, but who you are today, kind of what would be on it, right? What is that identity? When we say identity, we encourage people to really think about the things that matter deeply to them, not what you were good at necessarily, not what you made money at. You can have people that were very successful attorneys, doctors, financial advisors, but it wasn't their passion. They loved it. They did it. They built wealth, but they're ready for something else in some cases, right? So what is that? How do you identify that? And we have a little exercise that we walk people through. We call it a WACRonym. So you know what an acronym is, where you think of a word that every letter stands for something?
Sure.
Well, a WACRonym, WA stands for who are you? So if I asked you just to think about who you are in terms of things you enjoy, how you would describe yourself, how others would describe you in terms of the things that you like to do, what matters the most for you, can you begin to write down a bunch of those terms and then pick some of the ones that you think are most representative of who you are and arrange them in a way that it comes out in an acronym that kind of pops into your mind? So, for example, I don't have mine right in front of me, but my acronym, my WACRonym, is solve it. Right? I love solving problems. I love helping people find their way, navigate through problems. So for me, put me in a situation where I'm helping to figure out how to solve a problem, whether it's financial, whether it's within families, whether it's in communities. That's what I love. And for me, each of those letters stands for something, right? So S is solutions oriented, right? O is open-minded. I love to hear both sides of an equation, right? L is logical. I have a pretty logical approach to things. V is I'm vested, right? Like if you ask me to help you on a problem, literally I've been blessed with a gift to be able to focus almost to the exclusion of everything else, which is both a blessing and a curse. E is eloquent, right? Like people often come to me. I don't think of myself this way, but people say, John, we want you to speak up at the community meeting. We want you to explain this. We want you, it is kind of what I do for a living, and I know I'm good at it. Therefore, I can help people kind of express their ideas in a way that persuades others or at least deepens understanding. E for me is, or I, solve it. I'm an introvert. And people hear what I do and they're like, wait, you speak to people all the time. I'm like, yeah, but after I'm exhausted. I can't wait to take a nap. I like people in groups of 4 to 6. That's what an introvert is to me. If I'm in a room of 100 people, I'm exhausted. But get me in a situation where I can speak deeply to people. And T is thankful. I'm just grateful for every opportunity I've been given. So when I think about what's next for me, I think about this acronym, SOLVE IT. Right? And if I can find a situation that matches those characteristics. So, for example, if somebody said, who I am today, I want to be a terrific grandparent. Well, that's great. But if you take a job consulting where you're going to be consulting 60 hours a week and traveling all over the place, that's not going to work for you. It doesn't identify who you are. So that's why we like this concept of awakening, identifying your core values. And then, so I won't put you guys on the spot to come up with your own acronym. And for your listeners, I would love if people away from the podcast could just start on this, writing down some of the things that matter and try and fashion an acronym out of it. So identity is big. And guys, I don't know, have you experienced folks who've retired and then kind of lost a sense of who they are?
Yeah, I think that happens a lot. I'd love to know my own acronym. You know, one of my core purposes that I feel like in my life are to help people improve their trajectory in life, whatever that means, right? Mm-hmm. Whatever trajectory they're on, I want to try and improve that with them and try and make that better. And we've really focused on youth as a family. We've really focused on people, you know, kids 12 to 18 that are, you know, either homeless or runaways or struggling in home life, and they need a helping hand, you know, through no fault of their own. And so we've spent a lot of time on that. And so I'd be curious as to how to come up with a acronym, both that or for our financial advisory team. That'd be kind of fun to go through our team identity.
Right.
And see that. And so that'd be kind of fun. But yeah, so frequently, you know, one of the things that I think, and we don't necessarily joke about it, but we see is a lot of times people retire and we see so many people pass away a year or 2 or 3 years later. And a lot of that is because they do become either sedentary or they don't have an identity beyond their work, or they can't find that additional purpose in their life. And so it really does shorten down the lifespan, I believe, thoroughly.
By the way, and this identity is something, if we're going to live 25, 30 years in retirement, you're going to have multiple opportunities to reinvent yourself or to be transitioning. You may need to transition when you move from one lifestyle to another, from one geography to another. We lose a spouse or someone really significant. It all calls into question, well, who am I now? Right. And so it's not just a retirement this psychological portfolio identity. It's really something to be used throughout those later years.
Could have used this. So, yeah, of course, this is recent for me because I worked retail, general manager of a retail shop for years and building this podcast business on the side. And then finally, it was about 3 years ago, I thought, well, I'm going to do this full time. So this is my first go at being a solopreneur, entrepreneur. The first thing I noticed is, holy crap, I'm not answering questions all day long. People aren't calling me and asking me questions. Right. I'm by myself. It's lonely. Mm-hmm. I don't have anyone to help me. It's weird. And so I'm like, totally, like, this is just a taste of that, you know, of what people kind of go through when they retire. You go from being this person that everyone's always asking questions and you have all the answers to now, like, none of that is happening. It's a weird transition.
That's hard. It's a hard, not only a weird transition, but a difficult transition because you're not mentally prepared for that.
Right.
Yeah. I wasn't thinking about that was going to be an issue.
Right.
At all.
And I was serious when I said I'm not going to put you on the spot because it does it requires some work, right? Some buy yourself work to really think about what's important to you, and then and just a guideline, try to come up with something that's 7 letters or less. You don't want a acronym that's supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, right? Kind of hard to remember all the letters, but something that really represents who you are, because then when an opportunity arises, you can measure it against who you believe your identity is today, and make sure that things are as aligned as they possibly can be.
Is there a place to help with the acronyms?
Yeah, we have some workbooks and things that go along with this. So we'll make sure that you guys have them, because what we do, and by the way, this is a fabulous use for AI, right? Because we'll give you some sample words to start with, and you might be able to identify, but I found myself saying, give me a word that describes this and starts with E, right? So, then you get a whole list. You're like, that's the one, right? It can help us. But the important thing about a acronym is, look, it may adapt over time. You may say, hey, actually, I like the acronym, but I've got a different word that really matches who I am now. But the whole idea is trying to get a grasp of your identity so that we're identifying who we want to be going forward, not who we were in the last chapter of life. When we think about our identity, think about who you were in elementary school versus your identity in high school, versus your identity when you first started your career, versus your identity when you started a family, versus we constantly go through identity changes. But for some reason, when we get to retirement, we just think we're going to be the same person for the next 30 years. It doesn't happen that way.
On the beach with the drink in hand for 30 years.
There you go.
Sign me up.
Brandyn, you have some more numbers for us?
You got it.
Oh, so he's got to get the phone out.
I know. Usually I have the laptop. But... All right. So, and this is according to Bespoke, but so the top 8 Bitcoin ETFs totaled $150 billion. The top 8 gold ETFs are at about $180 billion, which essentially we're almost sixes with the top 8 Bitcoin ETFs and the top 8 gold ETFs, which is just kind of interesting, right? Because Bitcoin really wasn't on the scene all that long ago. I mean, it's this recent phenomena. Is Bitcoin like the new gold? It's not in a lot of ways, but it is in some ways. And so it's kind of interesting to see, these kind of alternatives that people like to look at and just the rise of that. And anyway, kind of an interesting topic.
Sure speaks about the interest and the demand for kind of cryptocurrencies in general, to be able to grow at that fast of a rate, because it's taken how many decades for gold to get to that level. Yeah. And so it is just kind of, and I don't think it's good, bad, or indifferent. It's just a number. But it is an interesting number that now there's as much money in a cryptocurrency with nothing behind it, as opposed to a metal that carries, in a lot of people's minds, some intrinsic value inside of it and has a use for materials and goods. So.
Rex, how much is it crypto, and how much is it just a separate vehicle outside of the norm that people want to try? It's not a metal, it's not gold, it's not the stock market, it's not real estate, it's this new thing, and so everyone does the new thing.
Yeah, it's definitely part of a new red hot dot, right?
Yeah.
And so, and again, this is how much is in the ETFs. This isn't even how much is outside of the ETFs.
Yeah.
Right. And so it is,
They forgot, they didn't call me.
You sure it wasn't that survey you responded to?
That might have been.
It was either that or it was your car warranty, whatever that call was that you took.
Yeah, I avoid those guys like the plague. Oh man. John, talk to me about purpose. This is a question I ask on my Ascent Life podcast. I ask every single guest this. It's really the main question of the podcast. It is, tell me your definite major purpose, because I feel like we as humans, and I think maybe more males for some reason, I don't know why, but right now just don't take the time to think about purpose and how it impacts your life while you're working. But then, of course, maybe it changes, or you should really think about it during retirement.
Well, it's kind of interesting, because I think a lot of people think purpose is something that strikes you like a lightning bolt, right, as you're sitting contemplating life ahead. It usually doesn't work that way. In fact, I oftentimes refer to a quote from James Clear best-selling self-help author. He wrote the book Atomic Habits, and Clear put it, I thought, very well. And I'll paraphrase because I can't state the quote directly, but it essentially said, passion is not something that strikes you out of the blue. It comes from getting involved, and then it develops over time, right? So I would say for most of us that started a business, started in our careers, unless you were one of the 10% of fortunate people that knew you wanted to be a doctor at age 5, and that's exactly what you did and followed through it, most of us kind of stumbled and bumbled our way into something. And when we got into it, we started to meet people who taught us more about it, and we started to learn what we were good at and what we enjoyed. And we started to expand on that, and that gave us mission and purpose. So it's something that oftentimes it evolves over time. And one of the reasons, or one of the methods for discovering it, is simply to accept invitations, right? Mm-hmm. To join or to try or to experience. Where as we get older, as Matt mentioned earlier, this topic of chance collisions versus intentional interactions, we know that as we age, the one number that goes off the charts is the amount of time we spend alone. Right? Because those chance collisions, we actually peak at making friends at age 24, right? From there, after we leave college, university, armed services, we maybe meet a spouse, we start a family, we start in a career, our social network actually begins to shrink. And that continues over time. And so being introduced to new topics, new people, new experiences is something that we do have to be intentional about. Now, it's interesting. Nancy Schlossberg says when it comes to discovering passion and purpose in retirement, most people fell into what she called 6 different paths. So she said we have people who she deems continuers. What are continuers? Well, they're people that they stay in the field where they previously worked. Maybe they consult. Maybe they work part-time for a company. They're phasing retirement out, but they're still active in the field. They just do less of it, as opposed to what she calls involved spectators. These are people that no longer work in the field, but they follow the industry, the news. They know everything about, they know all the movers and shakers. It's like a hobby that they follow. They're called involved spectators, as opposed to adventurers. What are adventurers? Adventurers are the people that say, hey, I built a business. We made, industrial tubing. It was very great, made a great living, but now I want to open a flower shop. I want to do something totally different. Maybe because I never had a chance to explore this thing, and I'm okay. They're adventurers. They're like, hey, next adventure, next trip, let's go. Let's give it. I'm going to travel the world. I'm going to do whatever. Away they go. There are people called easy gliders, and I envy easy gliders. Easy gliders are the people who wake up every day and they just let life come at them. Yeah. They're riding the wave of life, right? They're going to pull joy out of wherever they are. They're also the people that drive their spouses crazy because they don't believe in day planners. They don't have a plan past tomorrow, but they're okay existing that way. There's another group of people we call retreaters. What are retreaters? There can be good retreaters, bad retreaters. Let me describe it. The good retreating is when you say, I worked in a really physically demanding career. I just need to take some time to relax. I don't want to get involved in anything. I'm going to take some time, just going to relax and chill out. That's okay, provided it's temporary. The bad kind of retreating, it usually starts in that. I'm sure you guys have seen this, where people say, I'm looking forward to my retirement in 6 months. Really? What are you going to be doing? I haven't really thought about that much yet, because what happens is when we retire, the routine goes away for the first time since kindergarten. Nobody's telling you what time to be somewhere, who you're supposed to see, what you're supposed to accomplish. That sounds great, but in another sense, it's a total loss of structure, right? So being able to think really about what this looks like moving forward, I think is really important. The retreaters who retreat, oftentimes inertia takes them to a place where they don't want to be. In fact, remember back during the pandemic, the term was invented, Blur's Day. Blur's Day is where Thursday looks like Monday, Tuesday looks like Wednesday, Saturday looks like Thursday. Like we couldn't tell one day from the next. They just kind of ran into one another because there was no reason to get up in the morning. There was nothing to accomplish that day. I get it. We can get over addicted to the accomplishment thing, but being under addicted is a problem too. So retreaters are another category. The last category is called searchers. And these are the people that, they know they want to do something. They just haven't hit on it yet. And by the way, once you follow one of these paths, it's not like you follow the path for your entire retirement. You may change it over time. You may start as a continuer and then one day decide you're going to be an adventurer. You may need to take some time to retreat. But oftentimes when I share this with audiences, they're like, yeah, that's where I am, or that's where I am. So we can kind of self-identify. But discovering purpose and mission is really about kind of getting involved in something and discovering whether that is where your passion lies or not.
Love that. As we close up here on this transition into retirement, what are some of the roadblocks that I'm thinking just one off the top of my head, just not even thinking about it in the first place.
Yeah. So a couple of roadblocks. One I'll just mention briefly, and that is thinking about your relationships, right? We think that we're the same gregarious people that we were in our 20s, and we may be, but oftentimes we're not in the same environment. So Matt asked me earlier about this topic of third places, right? Everybody needs a third place. What's a third place? Well, sociologists say your first place are the relationships in your family. Your second place are the relationships at work. What's a third place? And actually, housing developers are now thinking about third places as they plan communities. A third place is a public space where people go, where they meet a mix of people who are kind of regulars, people they see on a regular basis, who they develop friendships with. But there's a steady flow of new people coming in. It could be a park, it could be a library, it could be a dog park, it could be a club, it could be a restaurant. Whatever it is, it's very important because that flow of new people are potential new relationships. Because when we retire, as I said, that social network begins to shrink. There's a theory of aging. This is going to sound dismal, but I'm going to tell you the reason I'm sharing it with you. It's a theory that aging is society's way of removing you without it being noticed, right? So we withdraw, one day, poof, we're gone. The way to fight back against that is to become involved, to make yourself relevant, to reach out. So we want people to think about their relationships, right? Think about relationships they can rekindle, relationships they can start. If nothing else, what's my third place? Where do I go to meet new people, right? It's really, really important. But a couple of the other roadblocks, beware of social clocks, right? People saying, you're too old to start a new. Why do you want to do that, right? The expectations of, shouldn't you be retired? Shouldn't you be enjoying life? Shouldn't I be anything? It's about my identity and where I'm at today. So the loss of structure is a roadblock, right? It's for the first time, as I said, since kindergarten, the freedom's great, but you need to work on rebuilding a structure so that the days begin to differentiate and they have meaning and purpose. So those are a couple of things to begin to think about. I think that kind of that social clock one is a big one because societal expectations really make people feel hesitant about doing things. And again, I mentioned earlier, part of my identity is introvert. Oftentimes I'll have people say, John, I don't know how to do this because I'm not good at meeting people, right? What's interesting is there's a guy named Robin Dunbar. He's a guy that invented something called Dunbar's number. Malcolm Gladwell talked about it in his book Blink, about how most people, Dunbar said, can only manage 150 relationships at a time. Now, don't panic. It's not 150 best friends. It's a couple of best friends and then a lot of other acquaintances. But Dunbar also has what he called 7 traits of friendship. So if we think about things, if you've ever done this, we call it small world syndrome. You get talking to somebody. You ask where they're from, where they went to school, what their hobbies are. It's like 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon. All of a sudden, you're like, you did that? I did that too. I went there. You knew this person. All of a sudden, you're connected in a way. And so when we tell people to reach out for friendships, it's an exercise I often ask people to do. I'm like, look, just turn to the person next to you. Think about these characteristics like hobbies, values, your taste in music, your sense of humor, right? if you can strike on some of those things, it's amazing how many connections people will come up with. And I always say, imagine if when we met someone new, we actually search for things we have in common versus searching for things that we disagree on, right? Because oftentimes we meet somebody new, we're trying to figure out what their angle is, right? It's kind of like, what if we opened ourselves up a little bit just to kind of understand kind of where they're at and coming from? So those are some of the roadblocks. Be careful of the social clocks. That's a big one that we see.
Yeah. Love that. And then to close us out, any final words on moving into retirement, John?
So I think of a quote from my favorite philosopher, one of my favorite philosophers, Willy Wonka, right? He said, remember when he was taking all the kids into the chocolate factory? He's like, so little time, so much time, so little to do.
Yeah.
Scratch that, reverse it, right? This is what we're talking about with the freedom paradox. Before you find yourself in a situation where there's so much time and so little to do some intentional thinking about your identity, the relationships that you can rekindle or perhaps begin, and the mission and purpose that you may want to embark on to kind of understand who you'll be and what you'll do in this next chapter. And believe me, life is going to be made up for many of us if we're going to live into our 80s, 90s, or beyond. It's made up of many chapters. And so we may have a chance to kind of work through that psychological portfolio many times.
People want to dig deeper. Is there a way to get a hold of you or look for some materials?
Absolutely. Certainly through Rex and Brandyn is probably the best way. HartfordFunds.com as a website where we have some of these materials as well as other research from our work with the MIT AgeLab, as well as other experts. And we'd certainly encourage people to go there, take a look, and see what they can learn. It's kind of a lot of my specialty is in all the areas outside of investments and financial products. It's really in the psychological and quality of life issues moving forward.
Yeah. Thanks so much for your time today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
This has been Through the Pines, produced by the Banyan Collective and recorded in our camp trailer here inside the Monarch Building in the Nine Rails Arts District on historic 25th Street. If you found value in this podcast, which I know you did, consider supporting us here at buymeacoffee.com/Banyan Media. You can see our wonderful, beautiful faces on YouTube at Through the Pines, and you can like our Facebook page at Pines Podcast and on Instagram at Pines_podcast. This has been Through the Pines, reminding you to use yesterday's dollars to finance tomorrow's dreams.